Sally Gould, good to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. I'm holding your book here for everyone who's watching. Frog, The Secret Diaries of a Paramedic. The amazing team at Simon & Schuster sent it to me, but I listened and literally finished the last chapter this morning. I loved it. And I think the life of a paramedic and anyone who's in a first response job in Australia is a job that gets nowhere near enough credit for the difficulties in which you encounter daily, but also the service that you provide to humanity. So I think firstly, it's important to thank you. But secondly, I want to ask you and, go deep right off the cuff. What has 14 years in the paramedics taught you about the fragility of life, and how has your relationship with that fragility developed?
I think, deep question to start. I love it. The job is so unique, and yes, it is difficult. And yes, I have a lot of respect for all paramedics and people in emergency services. But over 14 years, you get to see everything, people at their absolute worst in unexpected circumstances, and you get to be with people in those intimate moments. And I think that is a privilege. Yes, it's a challenge and it's hard not to take that home and to let that flow into my own life, but there's so much good that can come from being in those moments that you are privileged to be within. I think, it's given me such a unique perspective on making the most of the moments we have, I think.
One of the things you talked about sort of towards the middle, third quarter of the book is how your own mental health was personally affected through a period of your time in the paramedics. And I'm not sure what, you feel like your mental health relationship is like today. But do you think that that is a product of the experience of time in those situations and circumstances which, so much of your energy is diverted to caring for other people that maybe you forget to care for yourself?
Definitely. I think the struggles I went through with my mental health were probably a combination of factors. I think I've got a natural predisposition, probably genetically, to mental health struggles. But I can't deny the fact that there's an element of burnout and PTSD all rolled into that lovely little mix of not looking after myself. I joined the job and just fell in love immediately. Like, I just loved it and I wanted to be there all the time, and I became quite addicted to the thrill of it and the high acuity and being as busy as I could and seeing as much as I could, and had zero focus on looking after myself after I came home, which is just not sustainable. Even the physical toll of those 12-hour shifts, I just wasn't paying enough respect to the fact that you come home and you need to nurture yourself and look after yourself. And it was easy to keep up because I was so fresh to the job and I loved it so much. But I reached a point where I didn't even recognize myself and I didn't even see it happening, just sliding into this strange version of myself where I was really broken because I'd poured so much into that caring role and completely neglected myself, I think.
I heard you mention in there that there was kind of a recognition when you came to accept that your mental health wasn't right, that you had spent so much time developing your career and who you were at work, but kind of forgot to think about developing you and your personality, because I think it's so important to note that, like, you are still so young, 35. Like, we're young people, Sally, right?
Yeah.
Despite the grey hairs that are starting to pop up on my head.
There's plenty in my head, yeah.
We're so young, and there's still so much development to happen in terms of the way our personalities flourish and grow, and the way that we start to understand ourselves. It's interesting, a concept that became very clear to me at an earlier point in my life, like 21, 22, where I looked back and had been so engulfed in the success that I wanted to have from a career perspective that I realised I was clinging to the identity of that and didn't really recognise who I was outside of it. Does that resonate with you?
100%. That's exactly it, because I'd set my heart on becoming a paramedic quite early. I was probably 15 and they were doing all the careers talks at school, and I was trying to work out what I wanted to do, and I knew I wanted to do a health job, so I was thinking nursing, psychology, medicine, and I was super drawn to paramedicine. And once I set my mind on something, I'm like, that's what I'm doing. So I chose all the subjects to align with that. I'd planned a gap year to earn money, to move away to the only university that did the degree. Everything was set out, and I was so laser focused on becoming a paramedic because I'd probably attached my self-worth to doing a good job of being a paramedic. And I took all the steps and I got there, And it was everything I'd dreamed of. Like I put that uniform on and I felt like someone. I felt important. I felt like I had an identity and that I was really bloody good at the job. And I loved that feeling. But as you say, I just didn't really consider that I was someone else outside of that uniform. And that's what I completely left, for way too long, to think, I'm a woman and I'm an adult and I was a wife and all those things that I don't know, they just fell to the wayside because of how intensely in love I was with the job, perhaps, and that sense of identity, which didn't work out well for me.
I got so many questions off that because I think that is like, there's so much relevance in that for anyone in any walk of life. You mentioned when you put the uniform on, you felt like you were someone. Is that a response to maybe at some point in your life feeling like you weren't?
I think we like to cling on to things that other people see value in. And I'd done well at school and that ran its course of being, Sally's intelligent, she scores really well on tests and she's, a brilliant student. And then you leave school and then, well, where am I getting that validation from? Like, I have my gap year, I do a few jobs to earn money, but I'm no longer hearing that messaging of that I've got something tangible that I've achieved that other people can look at and say, oh, you're excellent at that. And then I found it again in paramedicine. Like I show up to my job and I do a great job and there's other paramedics saying you're doing a really good job. And there's other people saying, oh, wow, you're a paramedic. That's such a cool job. I could never do that. And that feeds into that sense of validation. But, 14 years down the track, there's so much that I achieve outside of that uniform that now means way more to me. I still adore my job. I can't deny that. And I still feel that sense of pride when I put the uniform on. That hasn't changed. But what's changed is that when I take it off, I'm still just as worthy and valuable and contributing to society in so many other ways that aren't just turning up to do my job. Yeah.
So challenging, isn't it? I think that devotion is the highest order of love. Like devotion to anything, whether it be your partner, your now 2 kids, your career. When you see somebody who's incredibly devoted to the things they've chosen to partake in throughout the course of their life, I think there's something very attractive about it. Like I love looking at, somebody who has found an absolute passion in whether it be art or music or something, and you can see that it just takes up so much of their brain space because they want to be the best they possibly can at it. But devotion is also a fickle beast because you can find yourself too entrenched in one of the things that require your attention that you forget to give time to yourself and to the other areas of your life. So how do you not fall back into that trap? Like how now do you recognize, or maybe I'm a little bit too work-centric at the moment and I need to pull the reins back and give some energy to the other areas?
Yeah, I used to think that to be a good paramedic, I had to be throwing everything into that. And I think I've just had a perspective change where I think if I look after myself at home, I will show up as the best person and paramedic that I can be. So it's that sense of entirely devoting myself to that one thing doesn't make me healthy or well-rounded. It actually takes away from who I am. But if I'm looking after myself in my days off and attending to the other areas of value in my life, like being a mother and being a wife and being a friend, then when I do show up to work, I can still trust that I'm showing up as the best version of myself, I think. And just maybe keeping that perspective on that my job is probably more than a job to me. I'm still incredibly devoted to it and I'm very passionate about it. But that passion comes out in other ways now. It comes out in the book that I've written about it. I like to speak to university students and mentor them in coming into that and talk about the culture of ambulance and those sorts of things which still feed that passion but are slightly diversified away from, showing up to my shift every day and just keeping the balance, I think.
I love that word balance. I feel like balance is a word that people either love or hate. Like you hear so many people just diss that idea. I've got 2 ideas on that. I reckon I was someone searching for that balance and then I had a revolt against it and I thought, I don't ever think you achieve balance. I think certain seasons of your life have different spotlights and I think that's natural. So like for a season of my life, the book was the spotlight
and I was still tending to other things, but they weren't my main focus, and that's okay, knowing that that season would soon end and my spotlight would move elsewhere and it would be a different season of life. And I think that's the way I like to look at it now, in terms of one thing is normally the main focus and it has to be for a period, and that will shift into other areas. Maybe that's my current thinking. I might change my idea on that tomorrow, but I like exploring that. I don't think you ever achieve that balance where I feel like you can be everyone, everything to everyone in all areas of your life at all times.
No.
Maybe that's unreasonable. Do you reckon?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I used to think you could, and I would say I'm a pretty naturally balanced guy in some areas. I find it hard to switch off, like when I feel a sense of a responsibility to something, whether it be, work, the people in my life, my health. It is hard for me to switch my brain off and relax at times. However, I'm probably a little bit more like, I'm in real estate and I'm naturally far more easygoing than most of the people that I work with. Like, I have a very relaxed approach, and I think that works really well for me and brings a sense of calm to the people I work for. But there have been times in my life where I haven't been that. I've been kind of a bit chaotically focused, and I like to think of it was Tim Ferriss that wrote an article that kind of differentiated between effectiveness and efficiency. And I think that both play their role. But I think that if you're ultra efficient or kind of falling into this productivity debt where you're doing things for the sake of doing things and ticking things off that aren't necessarily effective, then that's where you need to kind of filter yourself and stop and take a pause. And so I'm trying to get better at not doing a good job of it, might I say, of removing things from my life that aren't necessary. But it takes so much time, and I think it takes self-security to know that you don't need the things that you're giving all of your time to be enough.
And to really nut out what your values are.
Correct.
And where your time is precious, and yes, you can devote that to what you want to, but it needs to be the things that resonate with the values that you hold.
Big time.
Yeah. And we do fall into that trap of just getting things done or doing things that maybe other people place value on that don't resonate so much with ourselves and our own values. But it's hard. It's
so hard because I think with social media, there are so many strengths to social media. I find myself sometimes maybe talking about this too much, but indulge me once again for everyone listening. But I feel like social media has so many positives. Like, you can be connected with people who have great ideas. You can be inspired by things. You can, choose to watch content and absorb people's information that are good for your life. But you can also see a bunch of stuff that you didn't necessarily sign up for. And part of the problem with that is if you start to absorb things that then become a part of your psyche or how you show up in the world that don't necessarily work for you, it can kind of become a little bit of autopilot where you're moving. I think there's a Japanese philosophy that's like, if you find yourself on the wrong train, get off as soon as possible because you don't want to go too far in the wrong direction. And I think that having the presence and awareness to recognize when maybe you've gone down the wrong path and pausing and changing trains, I think is a really important skill to develop as you get older. And one thing that I've figured out for myself is that every decision I make in my life, I need to apply the filter of asking myself the question, does this work for me? Is this good for my life? And, it's the whole ice bath in the morning, bro optimization routine that you're told you need to do to be successful. But there is centuries of examples of people who, got up at 7 a.m, went to work, were very effective at their job, had a black coffee at 9 p.m. in front of the TV, got their 6 hours of sleep and got on with it. So I think that there are, you can be sometimes too focused on what you think is the right way to live your life and not presently aware enough to figure out what works for you.
And also to have the courage to say, I thought this was the right thing and I subscribed to it and I gave it a go and it's not working for me. I need to hop off that train, because sometimes it's hard once you're on it, and if people are validating that that's the right direction, you can just go with it because it's the easy path. But as you say, you've got to stop and reflect and think, no, I gave it a try. It didn't work. It's not where I want to put my energy at the moment. Let's get on a different train and try that out.
Was there ever a time in, the early stages of your career where I can imagine that you have an ideal for what being a paramedic will look like? you step into it, you start to gain the experience, and you realise that there's all these really heavy moments that you have to absorb. Was there ever a question, have I chosen the right career?
I think when my dad was in the job, which gave me a bit of a head start in some ways, but unfortunately it didn't make me naturally amazing at the job. It was still that huge learning curve of being completely novice at something, seeing other people who are so good at it and being so intimidated by that gap of where I'm at, where I want to be, and the only way to get there is through a whole lot of discomfort and making mistakes and learning at an incredible rate. And when you start anything new, I think you think, oh, am I good enough for this? Am I doing it right? Am I going to be able to get to that end point where I want to go? And so there were those moments in the learning process, but there was so much joy and satisfaction in the job that I never really doubted that it was something I wanted to apply myself to getting really good at. So yeah, certainly some doubts about the learning in the early parts, but yeah, never a doubt that it was the right job for me. I think I'm super lucky in finding that job that not only is a job and earns me money, but is satisfying to my soul. Like, it nourishes me to go to work. It doesn't drain me, which is a very unique position, I think, to be
Such
in.
a blessing.
Yeah. And I know that doesn't happen very often. And so, yeah, I'm grateful for that every day. That still every day when I get my uniform ready for work, I think like, yes, I get to go to work today. And I know that a lot of people have to drag themselves out of bed and grumble the whole way there. And that's not me. And I know that that's special. Yeah.
I love that in the book, and for the record, I did listen to it. Every person I've ever interviewed on the podcast, I've made my best effort to try and listen to or read what they've written, which is why I probably don't have too many authors on.
It's a big commitment.
Yeah, but here we are. And I loved it. I found it for me, there was just a natural curiosity. And like, I guess being in this for 5.5 years, you get email pitches every week for different people you'd like to have on the show. And sometimes it just doesn't feel natural. And I think it's got to be something that I'm really curious in, to go, hey, I'm going to spend the time and listen or read. And I have a fascination for people who live very different lives to me. And I was so excited to get my hands on this and listen. And I love that there is a journey throughout the book in which you are, first a ride along, and then you step into the role of being a full-time qualified paramedic. And then you start to go into the role of that curiosity, I guess, that comes up with seeing a frog, which is a term of endearment, am I right, for an intensive care paramedic, and then stepping into that role at the end, which is, I assume, is that still what you do now?
Yes.
Is that still your role?
Yes, it is, yeah.
And I love that there's this honesty and vulnerability at every chapter of this, evolution, where in your already very capable shoes, there is a sense of fear for the next step and how much responsibility comes with that. How do you handle the responsibility of knowing that life and death is literally at your fingertips and at the forefront of the decisions that you make on a daily basis?
I think my personality runs head on at that challenge, to think that I've got an opportunity to make a difference. I think I offload the responsibility that the outcome of the patient is entirely up to me, because if I carried that responsibility, it would destroy me. The thing that's happened to each patient happened long before I arrived, and it's not my fault. So the accident, the trauma, the sickness, I can't carry that as my fault. So I make sure to always separate that out. But from the moment I arrive, I've got this incredible opportunity of 14 years of experience, of all the studying and training I've done to make a difference, whether that's to the outcome, their comfort, their dignity, their pain levels, their understanding, the empathy I can provide, the information, the communication. That is such an honor to have that opportunity. So perhaps it's just the framing of looking at as a positive opportunity to rise to a challenge, maybe.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. There's a few things I want to pull on here. So the first is, I found, as I mentioned to you before, my cousin and her husband are paramedics. And I love them. I'm so proud of them. They do an amazing job and they're just great people. And they were telling me this one time about how they're not allowed to run on the job. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, where does that come from? And so hearing in the book these moments of frustration where onlookers and people who are, you know, the loved ones or the significant others of somebody who's in health distress, and they see you calmly move towards a scene, and there's this probably very natural, I can imagine I'd be the same if I was in their position, this frustration of like, why are you not running? Why is there no urgency?
Quick, help, they need help.
Explain why that's the case.
So there's a few reasons. I think firstly, if we're carrying heavy gear, a lot of the time our kits are quite weighty and we're quite loaded up, and it's just impossible to run with all the gear. The second one is if we do run with gear, we get out of breath, and the first thing to go when you're under that physical strain is fine motor skills. And the most important thing I need when I arrive is my fine motor skills to do intricate procedures. The second thing is I need my head to be in the right space. And if I arrive with my nervous system engaged and adrenaline pumping, it clouds my ability to make good decisions, and I'm already on the back foot. And also if I trip over on the way there because I'm running, what help am I then? And I think the way you arrive in a scene is what sets the tone of what care you provide. So if I arrive with a measured tone, I'm not yelling, I'm not speaking fast, I'm moving confidently but not rushing, then it communicates, oh, they're in control. I can hand over the stress, they're going to do their job. And you feed into the energy of the room, and if you bring that slow, controlled calmness, it just sends a message. Like, I'm not stressed by this. I've seen this a million times. I know exactly what to do, and you can all relax because I'm in control now. And I think if I was distressed, I'd want someone calm. Imagine if I arrived and I was freaking out and I was screaming and yelling and panicking and running. Like, you'd just be like, oh, what? She's got no idea what she needs to do next. But I can change that all just by arriving calm. I send a message. This is all okay. And that you can see that when you arrive, everyone sort of breathes out and the responsibility goes over to you, and you just send the message back in your body language. Like, I've got this. You're okay. We know what to do. This isn't stressful for me.
So interesting. As you explain that, I recognised that I was holding two thoughts at one time that oppose each other. The first being, one of my major beliefs and lessons over the last couple of years is you can't rush with intention, right? The other is where, like, if it was my partner or someone from my family, I would be so frustrated that there's not some serious rushing going on. And I'm like, isn't it funny that when in those moments in which most of us aren't trained for, there is this intense chaos that comes over our personality where we can't control necessarily what we say or think. So how important has the skill of being able to develop great interpersonal communication and understanding of human psychology and behaviour been to your role?
Oh, massive. I think people maybe think of paramedic role as the helping the human body problems, but it's so much more than that. There's a huge emotional and social element that comes with our job that is just as important as knowing the human body stuff, the medications, the procedures that we do. That's one part. But I think when something's time critical, we have such a prescribed job to do. So for example, a cardiac arrest, someone's heart has stopped beating. Every minute is crucial. And I have a lot of work to do in those first few minutes on the scene, and I don't particularly have time often to be talking to relatives. So it's important that I use that body language. If it's appropriate, maybe some eye contact with the bystanders so that I've acknowledged their presence, but then I've got to put my head down and work. And the way I communicate to them that everything's as under control as it can be is that I'm moving with intention and purpose, and it's controlled. So that what they see is this seamless operation of me doing everything I can, which hopefully communicates to them that I'm doing everything I can. And then it might be something as simple as, looking at them for a moment and just saying, I know this is very stressful. We're doing everything we can. Give me a couple of minutes and I'll come and talk to you. So they know that I've acknowledged they're there. I know they need my attention, but I'm doing my medical stuff that is time critical. And as soon as we've settled that scene and things are running as they should, I can step out and go and speak to them. But it's also just acknowledging, like, this is scary for you. This is your relative. What's their name? What's your relationship? Building that rapport with them. Because if it ends up that person doesn't survive, that's me that's going to break the news to them. And I need the rapport with them to understand where they're coming from, what their relationship is, that energy in the house, the vibe, and being able to do that respectfully I take that very seriously. And it comes through on every job. The parent of a child with a broken arm. It's super important to get them on board and to help them understand that their energy feeds into the kid and to get everyone on the same team working together. I think when I started the job, I was over my head with just the skills, like the medical side of it, that you can't even find the bandwidth to do all the other things. And maybe for years of my career at the start, I was just, doing what I could to manage the medical things and try and get that under control. But in the last, I'd say even sort of 10 years of my career, I've enjoyed being able to do not even icing on the cake type things, but those extra human things, the communication, the body language, the teamwork, the mentoring the other paramedics. That's where I find such joy in the job, because the medical stuff, I'm not saying it's boring, it's still interesting, but it becomes quite predictable. But what doesn't is, the way you interact with each individual on a scene. And I love that side of the job. Yeah.
It's so fascinating. As you're saying that, the other thing that come to the forefront of my mind is how much, one of the things I respect most about my parents is being a kid growing up with a chronic illness who was relatively well, but you always had this sense of, I don't know if you'd call it anxiety, but there was a little bit of worry that went into every 8-week clinic appointment, because you want to hear the good things. Yeah. You want to hear the positively reinforcing comments from your doctor that make you feel like you're on track and things are going well. Because you appreciate the fragility of life a little bit more when you're experiencing life that way. And one of the things that I give my parents so much credit for, now that I know them as an adult, and I see my parents still as mum and dad, but I see them as like amazing friends because I have a great relationship with them. And I know the kind of stress heads that they are in most areas of their life. I look back at them as parents with just so much admiration, because I would sit in the room. I remember the day that my doctor told me I had liver disease. I was 9 years old. And I remember immediately my instinct was, as soon as I heard those words, turn and look at my parents' body language. And they were so calm, which made me feel so calm.
And you now know that was just a facade, right?
I know that they were ducks, you know what I mean? Calm on the surface, legs kicking for life underwater, because they're trying to come to terms with all of this as well. And as I hear the stories of them when I was really young, like a couple months old, and some of the things that doctors said that were horrible, I think, far out, how did you gain so much composure to have the strength in that moment to be the parents you needed to be? But to realise that you're also processing that as a human being.
And that as adults, they can see the ramifications far greater than what you can as a 9-year-old. They're looking at your life and all the hopes and dreams they had for you, and still managing to keep that. That's so incredible. It's such
a special skill. And I think it's, you only hope that as you get older and you start to have these experiences for yourself, you're now a parent of kids 7 and 5, and I would love to be a parent at some point in the next few years of my life. You think, far out, I hope I have that much strength, because it is something to admire.
I think you'll find it.
Tell me about these moments in which there was a moment from the book that just shocked me, and I know it shocked all of your colleagues when you shared the story in which an older gentleman, dancing, having the time of his life at his son's birthday party, falls into cardiac arrest. You recognise the change of rhythm in his heartbeat, and you're providing CPR and defib. And this guy's literally talking through this procedure in which he should technically be dead. Explain that story, because I just think I'm interested, after you explain the story, for you to talk about how these moments that you experience that are just so not normal for the average person to experience make you feel differently about our place here on planet Earth and, how we exist as humans.
We received the 000 call for a gentleman who'd been attending a function and had developed some chest pain. Met us on the roadside. We pulled up and he hopped straight in the ambulance. So, already that everything's in his favour in terms of how quickly he received paramedic care. And we were only a short way into his assessment and he went into cardiac arrest. So his heart went into a chaotic rhythm called ventricular fibrillation. So he loses a heartbeat. He's got no proper circulating blood and he should lose consciousness until his heart rhythm is restored. We were straight on with CPR, and because he had oxygenated blood still around his brainstem and his brain, he was able to wake up, open his eyes and speak to us. And sometimes this happens if people are quite fresh, it's probably an awful term, but the cardiac arrest has just happened. And often we arrive to people who have been down for a period of time, so they don't have any sort of oxygenation and they're profoundly unconscious, which is the norm in terms of treating someone in cardiac arrest. But this gentleman was able to tell me his name and his date of birth while in cardiac arrest, which it just boggles the mind. And being a junior paramedic, working with an even more junior partner at the time, we had to sort of double check ourselves. We're just thinking, we've made a mistake here. We've misread that rhythm. Maybe his heartbeats come back spontaneously and we've missed that. So we had a couple of times where we'd sort of just check and both look at that monitor and see that chaotic rhythm and just think, no, we're doing the right thing. He needs CPR and he needs defibrillation, which is, sending 200 joules of energy through his chest. So we did that. We followed all our sort of guidelines and we're waiting for backup because the two of us are in the back trying hard to save this man's life. And, having to send that electricity through him knowing it's the right thing, but he's conscious enough to feel that and to scream out in pain. And the fact that as it's happening, I'm sitting behind him trying to gently restrain his hands because he's trying to interfere with the resuscitation attempts while we just wait for backup. And the horrific part is that this man didn't survive the ordeal, and I couldn't get my head around the fact that he'd been so viable in that he'd had such a good chance in my mind of surviving than to find out that, we took him to the hospital, they'd worked on him for a little bit longer and then they'd called it. And I hated that concept that we'd been there so quickly, he'd been conscious and talking to us for the first bit of the assessment, that he'd been viable enough during the arrest that he'd been taking breaths and breathing and speaking to me and making sense and being able to answer questions, and that he could still end up dead. And I think maybe I was angry. I was angry that even though everything had aligned for him, it could still end up in him dying. And maybe it's just that hope that, you're making a difference and that when things go well, that it should be a good outcome, and just that realization that it's not always the case, unfortunately. And people die suddenly or otherwise, and it's horrible and it's shocking, and sometimes you just need to recognize I don't have control over that.
How do you let go of that control?
It's a process. I think after that particular job, I just retold the story to myself and to a few colleagues over and over, just trying. My brain was obviously grappling, trying to process just the circumstances of it, the uniqueness of him being awake, and maybe just that spending that time with this man. And I hadn't even considered that he was going to die. I'd just been so hopeful that, he was going to survive it and we'd have another normal conversation after it, and that I'd met him and spoken to him about things during that time. And I don't know if you ever are okay with that, but I think, it's the reflection also of the way, if I'd known it was his last few moments, would I have done anything different? And I can't beat myself up because I was very junior and I was giving him the correct medical treatment, but it's in that phase of my career I didn't have the bandwidth to be considering all the other emotional and social things that maybe these days I would. And I don't carry any regrets over the way that job went. I didn't do anything wrong, but it's just getting your head around that life is just so messy and you can't predict the outcome.
Can I ask you an impossible question?
Yeah.
If that was you now, what do you think, knowing what you know, what would you do different in terms of the conversation you have?
I think the thing that I thought of a lot after that job was maybe I would have asked him if there was something he wanted me to tell his loved ones, because I had those final moments with him. I was the one talking to him, and I was so baffled by what was medically happening that I didn't have the mindfulness to think, well, let's ask him if he's got anything important to say.
Have you ever had one of those messages to share with family and friends?
I've certainly had some people share some things, and just before they've passed away, sometimes they just say things about their family. It's not a specific message. Sometimes I think they have an insight and they say things like, I want to go home.
There was an old lady in the book who spoke about that, right?
Yeah, she said, I go home now. And at the time I just thought, no, we're not going home. We're seeing the doctor.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like, she knew way more than what I knew about what was about to happen, I think. But sometimes if I do have those final moments with people, it's more about communicating to their loved ones that they were at peace. You know, I held their hand. I might have stroked their forehead or brushed the hair out of their eyes and spoke to them about how loved they were. And it's just that most people want to know that the final moments were peaceful and pain-free. And I think if I can communicate that to relatives who might not have made it in time to see their loved one, I think that's important.
Oh, certainly. It's interesting because one of the things that I picked up on throughout the book is that, and I don't know what you put this down to, outside of maybe human instinct or just experience on the job, but the older patients in whom, you know, legally you had to make an effort to save, in which you'd sometimes hope that maybe you could have left them with a little bit more peace in their final moments, or maybe with a little bit more of their dignity intact. What is it about? How does it register when you have an old person who's passing and, you know, they've lived 80 or 90 really good years? You know, I can imagine that for their family that's sad, but for you, having seen the polar extreme of that, which is young kids who lose their lives, it probably feels like a life really well lived, right?
And that's not to take away from the loss it is to, you know, the family and their loved ones, that it's hard losing anyone, regardless of age. I respect that. But the circumstances of someone who has lived a full life, yes, you experience grief because it's the expression of how much you loved them, you know, and how much you're going to miss them. And that is huge when you've known someone your entire life and it's a grandparent or a great-grandparent or a parent. But I think I've spoken to so many elderly patients that just don't have quality of life, and they just say, I want it to be done. I want this to be over. I'm sick of feeling like this. I'm sick of being sick. I don't want to be a burden of my family. I've lived my life. I'm done now. Can this just be over? So when I do see those people nearing the end of life, I just apply that principle and think, I think they've probably had enough suffering. And that why can't we as a society acknowledge that it's okay to die, you know, and that the elderly have a right to die peacefully when they've lived a full life. And that when we get to that stage, they might have dementia or cognitive issues or medical problems that mean they can't express their own wishes. And then as their family, we decide that, you know, that keeping them alive is everything. Is it? I don't know. Is quality of life more important, and letting people die peacefully more important than keeping them alive just because we can?
It's so interesting that I listened to an interview last year that popped up out of nowhere, and I loved it, and it was very emotional. I'm an emotional cat, Sally, so like, I feel like I've sat with a tear in my eye for most of this chat. But I listened to Andrew Garfield, the actor, and he was speaking to Anderson Cooper, the journalist, and they both lost parents at times in their life. Anderson lost his dad and his brother, I believe, and eventually his mum. And Andrew Garfield was speaking about losing his mum, and just like the grief process that he went through. He lost her to cancer and had quite a beautiful relationship with his mum, so it was quite a hard pill to swallow and a really hard reality to come to terms with. And he said, I went down to the ocean one day and I just had this urge to go into the ocean and be in nature. And he said, and as I was in the ocean, I had this epiphany that like sons have been losing their mothers for all of eternity. And that there's something natural about that. And had it have been the other way around, that would have felt so unnatural that it would have tortured my mum. And so there is a certain peace in knowing that there is a natural order to the way in which things are supposed to play out in life. That to those that have passed in their elderly years, there is a sentiment that life was lived. And so for you, this recognition of that and the time on job where you've had the ability to experience that and come to terms with that, what has it changed about your philosophy for a good life?
I love to maximize the time I've got, I think, and make sure the things that I'm doing are the things that resonate with my values and that I'm putting my energy where I really want it to be. And I guess that sense of, if my eulogy was read today, would all the things that I've done be things that I actually want to be remembered for and leaving a legacy that I want to leave? But I think I'm very pragmatic about that sense that, yes, something could happen to me and I don't want to live a life that doesn't have quality, you know. So I'm the strange 35-year-old that's got an advanced care directive in place because having seen people living without quality of life, I don't want my family to have to wrestle with that decision. I want it to be prescribed so that if the worst happens, they turn to my wishes that are already documented and know exactly what to do because it's aligned with what I want for my own life. And I don't know, I think maybe I think about death more than the average person because of the job that I do.
I think that's fair to say.
But I think I'd probably rather die suddenly at 70 than live to 100 and be living a poor quality of life.
So why do you think that as a society we have such a heavy focus on people wanting to live forever now? You know, like I watched that Brian Johnson's documentary on Netflix.
I haven't seen it.
I think it was, I can't remember exactly what it was called. And I'm sure you've seen this guy. You know, he's worth hundreds of millions. He's like a tech CEO who sold, and you know, he spends $2 million a year on his body. And he's trying to age slower and almost see if he can reverse age. And he's quite a unique personality and a character. Like, he certainly isn't the kind of character that I think a lot of people can see themselves in, right? And I kind of before it have just felt really weird about the concept. Not because I love life so much. I want to live the longest, happiest life I can with the people that I love. But there's just something about it that felt like there was no quality of life in the way that he was living. And whether that's up to him to determine whether he enjoys the experience of, you know, life as it's playing out for him. But for me, you know, I take 50 tablets a day. Someone with CF, the idea of all of these protocols and procedures and injections and medical testing in order to maybe get another 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, there is something, I don't smoke because I have cystic fibrosis, but there's something about when I look at an old Italian man who's, you know, out in the garden with a cigarette and an espresso, and I'm like, he's 90 and he seems to have had a really good life.
Yeah.
And I can't, and he has some alcohol and he's got his friends. I'm like, I can't knock that because it seems balanced. It seems well lived. It seems fulfilling. And I looked at this guy, and the one thing that I got from the documentary is it left me so baffled on why there is such a cohort of these people who are trying to live forever. Is it just the next thing to focus on, the next thing to be distracted by? There was this sentiment he shared that he loves his son so much and just, you know, wants to live as long as he can with his son. But I just felt, you know, why is it about quantity, not quality? Where have we lost that?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that natural order of things. I think there is a natural order that if we know we've got this finite time, then we are going to make the most of it. But I think we've confused along the way the quality of life thing with just living the longest we possibly can. And yes, there's I am so on board with all the medical, you know, progress that gives young people quality of life and manages conditions, chronic conditions, that gives people a longer lifespan. But I think we've gone too far in trying to control just the natural aging process. You know, we've got a medication for everything, and we think that just keeping someone alive into their 90s or past 100 with all these medications is a medical advancement. I don't think that's where we should be focusing. I think we should be focusing on medical advancements that help people with chronic conditions to have quality of life in those younger years. And I don't know why. I don't know why we think that living super long is the goal. I think living a normal lifespan with quality of life is probably the goal, I think.
Yeah.
the focus we should have.
I don't know if you've seen that adorable Nana in Australia recently. There's an article about her, and I think she's like 104, 105. She just celebrated her birthday. And they asked her what the secret is, and she said custard every day. And I'm like, Brian Johnson would be like, that would just irk that guy. You know what I mean? Because it's like, how's the custard lady still around at 105? And she looked happy, but it's so... I think there's a certain element of life to which you can't control, and
everyone's story is so different, isn't it?
Different.
You know, that Italian man smoking and drinking, living to an old age, that's his story. And the custard lady living to 104, that's her story. And I think if we try and apply like the one principle to everyone's life, it just doesn't translate. You know, we've each been given our own set of cards, and they are unique, and we make the most of the ones that we're dealt, I think.
I want to backtrack a little minute to where we spoke about the patient who, you know, you thought for all money was going to be okay. When you have those kind of experiences where, you know, there is so much hope because you have the competency of, I'm good at my job, we've done everything we can from a medical standpoint to prolong life and to save this patient, but for whatever reason, their time is up. How do you make sure that you don't become nihilistic? Because I think there's probably a portion of first responders who, because of what they see on a day-to-day basis, whether it be heinous crimes, whether it be the fragility of life, whether it be the uncontrollable circumstances of Mother Nature, if you're in New South Wales Fire or, you know, fire department, anywhere across Australia where a bushfire breaks out and you just see death and destruction. How do you not become nihilistic and believe that there's no hope? There's a British saying that it's the hope that kills you, and I hate that because I think that hope is the antidote to hopelessness.
Yeah. I think maybe over time I've reframed the success of each job to be whether I did my best, so that I'm not carrying that weight of whether the patient lived or died, because as I said, the worst things happen before I arrive. I'm only bringing hope and skills and expertise. But when I reflect on jobs, the way they sit well with me is if I've done my best. And I think if I can bring that to every job, it covers such a range of jobs. It covers the jobs where the person maybe didn't even need an ambulance. You know, they needed alternative care, but for whatever reason, they've got blocks to accessing that care, or they don't have enough health literacy to make the right decisions. If I bring my best to that job, it's compassion, it's understanding, it's kindness, it's maybe a bit of education or giving them a bit of information and just meeting their needs in that moment. If I go to the worst possible job and I do my best in terms of applying all of my guidelines, doing all my skills perfectly, managing my team well, delegating roles, making sure I'm doing the best for the mental safety of my team there, doing the transport well, doing the handover at the hospital well, I walk away from that just saying, well, we did a really good job. You know, and someone might say, oh, did the patient survive? I'll say, I don't know. I don't know. I didn't check back in on them because I don't need to carry the weight of which way it went. I carry the reflection of our team did so well today. We communicated well. We all did our delegated roles. We worked well as a team. We, managed the patient's pain. We all did a really good job. And I think if we fall short, it's then framed as, well, what can we do better next time? It's not like, I've stuffed up on that and I bombed the cannula and I forgot to do this skill or whatever. It's like, okay, next time I'm going to work on this skill so that doesn't happen again. Or I'm going to think of this thing. Every time I do this skill, I'm going to remember to do that part of it. Just that push forward of how can I be better for the next patient? And I just work so hard on that framing to stay in the right headspace so that you don't get bogged down in everyone's going to die, there's no hope, all those types of things. Maybe that's where I'm at now.
I like that. Control what you can control.
Yeah.
I want to ask, being in your role, you see so many different ways that a life can be lived. And, particularly like in Wollongong, having had a dad who was a copper, you'd hear the stories of some of the more challenging circumstances in particularly some lower socioeconomic areas in which, drugs are heavily involved, and you see kids who aren't looked after but should be looked after. And as someone who's lived in Wollongong for nearly all of their life, bar 1 year, I see a growing drug problem that seems to be getting worse every year. Like, I see the streets become more affected by it. The presence of it on the streets has definitely grown in the last 2 years, in my opinion. You see that every day. Are there times in which you feel that your job's not worth the risk that you take when you step into those environments?
I think when I signed up to the job, I signed up to help everyone. And sometimes they're not nice people, and sometimes they don't treat me with respect. But I've got a high sense of safety, and that I want to go home at the end of every shift, and I want all of my team to go home. So we've got a very cautious approach, and we're backed that if we don't feel safe going into a job, we don't go in. And police are super supportive of paramedics and turning up and securing scenes before we go in. And there's a lot in place to try and protect us. Yes, there are risks. There's unpredictable patients. And I think over the years, I've developed such a sixth sense for that sort of stuff. And so I feel quite safe in, reading rooms and predicting things and taking a cautious approach with, getting a police escort for a transport. But I do worry about people with less experience not making those right calls and being in dangerous situations. I think, unfortunately, we don't get to pick and choose which patients we get called to, and we don't have a choice. We help everyone regardless of their circumstances. But if it comes down to behaviour that's unsafe for us, I'm not getting involved. It's as simple as that. I have a family to go home to, as do all of my colleagues. And if someone's disrespectful and dangerous, then I'm not getting involved.
It's so challenging, isn't it? Like, I remember being 13 when, for the first time, my parents got divorced when I was maybe separated when I was 11, divorced by the time I was 12. And I remember the first night that we used to spend, equal time with both. And the first time that I was at mum's house, going to sleep in bed, and I would call my dad every night before bed, and he was on a night shift. And I remember the first time that he didn't answer me, and I wondered, I hope he's okay. And it kind of was the first time that as a young person, you look at your parents and you have so much admiration, as I've explained, for them. And my dad, we used to call Dad Robocop because he's 6 foot, built like the Australian Schwarzenegger. And you think he's invincible. And you're like, that guy, nothing can hurt that guy. Like, I've never, ever in my life I could walk down a dark alley as a kid with my dad with just ungodly sounds and sights all around, and I would never feel unsafe. I felt so safe and protected in his capable hands. But you get to an age where you realise that life doesn't work that way. And it was the first time that I had ever felt really unsettled about, my dad's the kind of guy that runs into danger to help other people. What happens if someone doesn't help him? And the only thing I knew to do, I went to a Christian school, but I wasn't religious. I was like, I need to pray because I need something that makes me feel like I have more control over this situation. Does the relationship change now that you have kids? You mentioned that you've got a family to go home to, but is there a little bit of you that second guesses things more because there's more on the line?
I'm probably more cautious. Because it's not just me anymore. I have got a family that I need to get home to, and I also think maybe it just gives you that appreciation to make sure everyone in your life knows how you feel about them before it's too late, while you've still got the opportunity. I think we're also, as a society, we don't say all the things that we want to say to people on a daily basis because it feels like weird or too much. But, tell your friends that you love them and what you love about them, every day. Why do we hold that off until it's too late or, something bad has happened to express all those thoughts? I think we've got a lot of room to just live to the fullest every day, which I've got that perspective because I see people die every day.
I want to ask, I feel like in the beginning of this conversation, we spoke about this idea of identity and clinging to identity. I felt this sentiment throughout the book that, it was kind of becoming confident in who you are as a person and becoming confident in the way that you can show up and own a scene and the way that you can own your role, whatever you do in life. Was there any imposter syndrome when you took off your very when you removed the strong presence of an Ambo's uniform and sat in front of a computer to write a book about a huge portion of your life in which you knew would be read publicly. And I now see you, through social media going to speak about that, and, you're here doing interviews and having conversations about that. Was there any imposter syndrome, and how has it made you feel differently about your identity?
Yeah, definitely. I've got that whole uniform that I put on to be a paramedic. And I found when I started writing and when I got published, I was like, I need an author uniform, which sounds ridiculous. But for me, that just felt like the natural way to tackle it. And I split my wardrobe into two. And on one side, I've got a colour palette that I wear to all things authory. And that's just the way I tackle it. Because when I put that on, I'm the persona of Sally the author, and that's different to Sally the paramedic, and it just gives me the boost that I need, because I am an introvert and I go home and I put my trackies on and I don't want to make a phone call, and I hate having to answer the phone if it's a number I don't know, and I'd much rather book online or even order with a QR code on a table than have to speak to someone. Like, that's my default. I need something to give me the courage to really embrace. And maybe that's silly to a lot of people, but for me, it works. And yeah, when I had the imposter syndrome of, even now, sometimes people say, oh, you've written a book, like you're an author, kind of like shying away from that. Like, oh, but I am an author. I have written a book, and that's super exciting. And it took a while to be comfortable in that, because I didn't want to claim expertise in that industry when I'm so new to it, perhaps. I am happy to say, like, I'm fairly expert at being a paramedic because I've been doing it so long, but I'm very new to being a writer. And it's also okay to be new at things and to say, I'm still learning that. I'm still developing my skills in that area. I've still got areas to grow in that, and I can still call myself an author and still be growing in that space, and that's okay.
100%. It's interesting, as somebody who's not a specialist at really anything other than
don't sell yourself short.
Well, I feel I've kind of always been like kind of a jack of all trades, master of none kind of guy. Like, I do lots of different things and I enjoy them all, and I'm not exactly the best at all of them, but I just show up in my way uniquely. And I've found that anytime I've listened to, whether it be a podcast, read a book, watched a film, I kind of like the stuff that isn't done through the perfect lens of lots of experience. I love the stuff that's a little bit rawer, that isn't exactly like, doesn't follow the guidelines of how to do this down to the T, where the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and it's got the perfect, like, I love something that's real, that's a story, that has a sense of personality to it.
Well, we love to know that people make mistakes and fall short, because we're sold this glossy version of so many things that when we hear, when I was writing this book, I had a mate, he's a nurse down in the Shire, and he's so enthusiastic and so keen to hear about my progress. He's like, oh, how's it going? How's this going? And I'd keep him updated. I'd say, oh, I got rejected by this person. He's like, oh, that's so good. And I was like, what? He's like, I love to hear about your failures. And I was so taken aback, because I was like, most people just want to hear about the successes. Like, oh, I won this competition, I've got this publishing deal. Like, they want the journey, but only the glossy side of it. And he was just so invested in the fact that it made my journey so much more valuable, that it wasn't straightforward and it wasn't linear and it wasn't all just from strength to strength. He was like, no, the value is in the fact that, you've been knocked back and you've come back and tried again, and that you've failed at this and you've tried again, and that you've fallen short on this and that you've overcome it. And I was like, oh, that is such a good perspective. I need some more of that in my life, because we love the glossy, successful side. And that's part of the reason why I started a social media for my author journey, was just to be transparent that I was new and I was novice and I was making mistakes and I was getting rejections, and that is normal. That's such a normal part of life. And I think people resonated most with the stuff that wasn't a success. Yeah.
Well, I think whilst your book is about sharing the experience of what it's like to be a paramedic and allowing people to see what they usually see as like the people who come to their aid in a moment of crisis, you're kind of the people that no one ever wants to see or deal with.
Yep.
But to see it from your experience is one reason why I think this book is so powerful. But for me, it was to see a young woman who stepped into a role in which you had to at every stage become competent and like step into yourself and realize that at times like leave yourself in order to come back and realize that you're enough, that you're figuring out, that you're learning, that this is not just part of being a paramedic, but part of being a human being. And I think to the perfectionist or the scholar or the academic who is well read and has many, you know, has much rich mahogany in their house and many leather bound books, that may not be the book for them. But I think which is what I hope that mine will be when it comes out, for the human being who is trying to live their life to the fullest, who wants to have a real experience, I think that is the book. And the way that you've written it, like, resonates with people. It resonated with me. So you should be very proud of it.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Is there anything else that you want to talk about before we finish? I know that...
we've covered a lot of ground.
It's
been lovely. It's been lovely.
We have.
There's nothing else burning that I want to share. It's just been, lovely.
Amazing. Where can they get it?
You can get it in stores, all good bookstores. It's online as well, and it's an audiobook, which I narrated myself, and it's also an ebook. So lots of places. Anywhere. If you Google it, you've got so many options.
Amazing. Frog, Secret Diaries of a Paramedic. Sally, so good to have you here.
Thank you so much, Bradley.
Cheers.